After that will be FPL segment. Hey guys, in FPL segment, I'm gonna spend less time on our positions and
Yeah,
give
but at least my position, 28.
FPL guys. I'm not even going to be talking about positions. I'm now. And hello, welcome to the Tale of Two Halves, an EPL talk show that is predominantly focusing on how amazing Leeds United is. Some of you seem to be having a problem with that. Why don't you start your own podcast? Huh? Stopping you. Ooh. And it's been a great weekend of sports in general, guys. Like Chennai Super Kings lost in a way where, for the first time, I've been having this blasphemous thought in my head that I've never had in all these years of being a CSK fan, which is, bro, what is Dhoni thinking, bro? Like, I've never had the thought before. We don't even entertain that. But now it's creeping in. It's that time of the year in my life, I guess. And in other news, we have officially arrived at the finalists for the NBA Finals, which is this series between Miami Heat and Los Angeles Lakers. And if you're into narratives in sports than the actual sports part, let me just simplify it as it's the greatest storyline right now between process versus personal. People versus organization. It's an epic battle. I can't wait for all of that. But fuck all that, bro. Let's talk EPL. In what has been an amazing weekend of football. As usual, there is a lot more bar drama than there should be every week. And we've heard of Fergie time, but there were goals which were way past even Fergie's bedtime. We have to discuss that. And some crazy downfalls followed by some crazier comebacks. And of course, this weekend had it all. And the most predictable thing of this weekend was Leeds United won again. This is getting boring. Somebody has to stop this. And so let me quickly introduce my panelists. There is the Chelsea fan who's also a data football analyst, Mr. Ram. Welcome to the show. There is an advocate who I feel is strongly responsible for the term and the theory and the policy behind Manchester United, Surit Patsardi. Welcome to the show. And of course, there is my fellow comedian who I'm sure is smoking off screen all this while. Just because his favorite manager, Jurgen Klopp, also does the same thing once the interviews are done. Welcome to the show, Anirban Dasgupta.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to the show, guys. Let's take a look at the results and of our last weekend, our first segment called Random Person Reading Results.
Brighton 2, Manchester United 3, Crystal Palace 1, Everton 2, Western Brom 3, Chelsea 3, Burnley 0, Southampton 1, Sheffield United 0, Leeds 1, Spurs 1, Newcastle 1, Man City 2, Leicester 5, West Ham 4, Wolves 0.
So obviously, first thing, let's address this, which is that I have the VAR's, the exact rule book excerpt in front of me. There are a lot of people asking a question on whether whatever happened at the end of the game, should they have even gone and given them the penalty. So let me just read out before I hear your views. The question is 8.13. It says, what happens if VAR identifies a clear mistake in a match-changing incident after the referee has blown the whistle for half-time or full-time? Right? And the answer, or rather the rule book says, the VAR is like an assistant referee. If an assistant referee is indicating an offense which occurred before the referee blew the whistle, the referee can still take action as long as the referee has not left the field of play. If the situation occurs, the VAR should immediately tell the referee, who can inform the players and stop them leaving the field of play. The incident should then be dealt with according to the normal VAR procedures, which is check, review, and all that. So this pretty much puts it to rest, if at all there has been any question. Surit, nobody is questioning on your side of the camp. A lot of us here have issues with that also. I'm just addressing the wider media there.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that we have taken that out, but Anirban, get your VAR rant out of this. What do you want to say about
it? No, of course, I'm really disappointed with what happened. 100-minute penalty, but I understand that if the handball was spotted, they'll have to go back. My problem with VAR is that I can't really objectively view it. Whenever Liverpool concede a goal, my first reaction is I hope there is a VAR check and it gets disallowed. So I'm coming from that point of view. It's very difficult. What happens when Leeds concede a goal in a tight offside? What's your first thought? Isn't I hope it gets disallowed. So I don't know what the impact is on football going forward, but it's very difficult for me to objectively say whether this is a good rule or bad.
Yeah,
mine is actually the exact opposite reaction. When United score a goal, I'm thinking, oh my God, is this going to get reversed? So But I get the point.
But just this match had at least what I can think 4. Connolly went down twice. And then there was this one. And was there any other VAR incident just in this match alone? There was just plenty of.
There was one other offside which was checked and it was offside, which was there were two where United had the ball in the back of the net and both of which were ruled out for offside. I think the VAR got all the decisions correct on this one. I mean, we can debate about exactly how VAR should work in terms of whether it should be
that's a different
obvious
thing,
errors. So that's a different debate.
Correct.
But broadly, I don't think any of the decisions were wrong given the laws as they stand today. I mean, the handball. Again, people can argue whether the handball rule should be this way or not. But the way in which the FIFA rules, regulations prescribe what is a handball today, I think that would qualify as a penalty. And I think there was an even more controversial one with the Eric Dyer one, which we'll discuss later.
So with respect to specifics of the match, I'm sure even a Surit wouldn't debate this. It was, I've always believed they're the luckiest mofos out there in the planet, this club. But this is something else altogether. I've never seen a match like this where a number of woodwork that happened. It was insane.
Oh, man.
It was something else. I felt so hurt. And then to see Graham Potter react the way he did, a lot of class in his.
No, there was some amazing shithousery in the end from Bruno Fernandes, right, in his post-match interview, where he said the point isn't to hit the woodwork. It's not to hit the post or the crossbar. That's not even a shot on target.
You're going to have 40 episodes in this program. You're going to be around for a long time. I'm going to see your club hit a woodwork a lot. I hope the Bruno Fernandes quote can be used there.
I think somebody should tell Bruno Fernandes the point penalties. Is to also score from open play.
Exactly.
But sure. So overall, I think there's no argument on whether Manchester United were lucky in this match, and it was ridiculous. But let's figure out why they were so dominated. That's something I would love for Ram to get in on Brighton's tactics. Like me, from the top of my head, what I remember of the match, I remember Solly March. Am I getting his name right?
Yeah.
Solly March was always open, and I didn't understand how a Solskjaer did not address the situation even in the second half. That was happening primarily because of Lamptey's work all the way down and then switching the plan. But Solskjaer wasn't adjusting to that at all. And Ram, your take on that?
Yeah, firstly, I think it's time that, or it's high time rather, that people in general stopped sleeping on Brighton, because they have a very, very competent, innovative manager in Graham Potter, who's done it at Ostersund and Swansea and now Brighton. They obviously play a very good brand of football, and I thought they dominated most, if not all, of this game, and it's reflected in the stats as well. They outshot Man United 18-7 and had a number of good chances. But yeah, for one, I feel as if Man United firstly didn't capitalize on trying to win the midfield battle, because the fact that they started Lallana instead of Yves Bissouma alongside Alzate it kind of showed that the midfield was there for the taking for Pogba and Matic and Fernandes to dominate, but they didn't do that. So that was one area of the battle that they lost. That
was not out of choice, though. I'm sorry to interject. It was not out of choice, though. Bissouma was suspended, right? Because of that.
Correct. So by default, Brighton's midfield was kind of susceptible to being run over, and Man United didn't take advantage of that. So that
I want to come to Surit with that later, but go on. So you were saying.
And as you correctly pointed out, obviously they focused some play down the right via Lamptey, but not just that. The fact was they were emphasizing a lot on switches of play. So both Lallana and Alzate and the centre-backs, Webster and White, were playing either vertical balls or switches into those half spaces that made them very dangerous. So for example, if Lamptey had taken the ball far on the right and drawn a lot of players in that direction, then there was a lot of space freed up on the left. So they switched to Alzate or to March. And obviously, Man United have Wan-Bissaka, who is, effectively like a black hole on whatever side of the pitch he's on, because he just shuts down space that well. But then they used overloads very cleverly. So they had March there, of course, but then Alzate also drifted wide, and those two are very good at combining. And they had Connolly making a lot of runs in behind defense in that region as well. So by creating those overloads and having runners in behind in that region, they managed to gain a numerical superiority. And I thought they just exploited that time and time and again.
So did you see any adjustment, though, from Solskjaer? Sorry, just to get the tactical part out.
Yeah.
Okay, you can take this as well. Did you see any Solskjaer adjustment, though? I didn't. I could.
I let Ram finish and then I can respond to that.
I'm probably negligent in saying that, because maybe I was concentrating on Brighton more, but all I could see was they were being caught time and time and again. I don't know whether that's because Pogba was being slightly negligent in his defensive duties, or whether Lindelof was continuing his poor form. I also noticed that Greenwood wasn't tracking back as much as I expected. So I think it cooked up like the perfect storm of both Greenwood and Pogba not being slightly derelict in their defensive duties.
I mean, I think Ram is sort of more or less spot on in terms of the analysis. I mean, Brighton obviously dominated most of the match. They got their tactics spot on. And I don't think Solskjaer had enough answers at all. And there were a couple of concerns. I mean, one is in terms of how he used his bench. Firstly, as Ram said, I think the midfield kind of certainly should have done better. Pogba had another really poor match. Maybe this is down to him, having been inflicted with COVID, sort of coming back into the squad, not really having had enough minutes on the pitch and enough minutes in the training ground. So maybe that will improve with time. But then that begs the question, why didn't Van de Beek play instead of Pogba? Because he's had a reasonably solid pre-season. He's played for the Netherlands. He played midweek, 90 minutes, and he's looking fit. So, I mean, why didn't he start? And that, again, brings you to the question of why Solskjaer is so sort of remiss in using his bench better. Because, as Ram said, it was clear that Greenwood wasn't quite tracking back. And Martial wasn't having the greatest of games. So maybe Lingard could have come on for either one of those, maybe even for Martial, and played on the right with Greenwood moving.
I think that lies your answer for your question. Maybe Lingard, full stop. I'm sure.
Lingard gets a lot of criticism, yes, but defensively he does his job. I mean, I think he's probably not not the most fancy-looking footballer going forward in terms of beating men, but he occupies space well, I think, and defensively his effort, I don't think you can ever question it. He's always sort of 100% committed. So I would have liked to have seen those changes being made a bit earlier, and even after United somehow got the lead and went 2-1 up. At that point, bring Van de Beek in. I mean, try and get control of the midfield. Try and keep the ball for some time. Try and take a little bit of sting out of Brighton. But again, that wasn't to be. Maybe Solskjaer was sending some sort of message to the board. I don't know, in terms of, because what we had missing, Daniel James was left out of the bench. Ighalo was left out of the bench. There was Brandon Williams was left out of the bench. So these are the amongst the three positions that United need strengthening. So maybe there was a message there. One point that I'd like to make, though, is that, and this is not from a tactical standpoint, but there were some people on Twitter who were saying that United fans shouldn't be celebrating this victory because if this is how the season's going to go, it's not going to be great. I mean, come on, what's the point of football if you can't celebrate?
Because you've had too many. Show some humility. That's all. I think those people on Twitter, just because they don't have display pictures, they don't make their opinions less valid, okay?
I mean, a 97th minute winner after full time. It's never happened. And you don't want us to celebrate that? I mean, come on, give me a break, right? I mean, look, I mean, football, I think, it's about celebrating the good moments.
To all those people on Twitter who did this, for 2 episodes, I've been trying to get some emotion out of Surit, but just in one tweet, you all did something. I'm so happy. I'm so happy to see this, Surit. Thank you so much for making it happen.
Please keep moving it the next week also.
We will give you his Twitter handles in this. It will be falling right here. Like, share, subscribe. I'm so glad it's happened. Okay, we'll move to the next match. Too much of magic. But this needs to be a new segment. Some people on Twitter has to be a segment. Seriously. But anyways, the next match that I want to talk to you about, because there's a great segue. The match where Saturday there's a match and a post-match interview, a manager is having something to say about a manager who's playing on Sunday. This is why I love EPL, man. Tottenham and Newcastle. Again, it's like when I saw the match, guys, it was a lopsided affair again, very similar to the previous match we discussed. Tottenham had no business dropping points there. Steve Bruce set out to defend. He played a 5-4-1 or a 3-4-3, however you want to put it. Joe Linton in left wing. Now that he's scoring 2 goals a season, you might as well put him left wing and Alvin on right wing. And it was purely set out to stop a 5-goal Spurs team. But Spurs had a lot of good chances. Darlow was fantastic, and then the penalty was ridiculous. And even Steve Bruce, for all his old school manager traits, the guy has a lot of integrity. He came out and he was the first one to admit that this is not done. The game is going to go to the dogs if we end up giving penalties like this. But most important thing that happened in that match, because we all knew, at least I was watching with a bunch of friends, about 8 of us, we didn't care what was the next game. We were like, do not change the channel because we have to watch Mourinho's post-game interview, because you knew that shit was going to go down tonight, and boy did it go well, because it was the best comeback. Because I genuinely thought Solskjaer's comment. Okay, for those of you who don't have context, let me give context before I let Surit give me his rant on whatever Mourinho did. Because the context is this: in the Europa League that happened last week, Mourinho went and measured the height of the goalpost, and it so happened that it was not perfect, which with whatever technique that he has to figure it out by putting his hand up and checking the difference and all. So Solskjaer actually had a good sense of humor. I thought what he said was damn funny. After his Saturday's match, he was like, "Hey, you had hit the woodwork, Brighton had hit the woodwork so many times," and Solskjaer was like, "Hey, I'm just glad Mourinho's not around to go and check the goalpost," which is a great joke. And it's okay. But what Mourinho did after that was even better. He laid the smack down. I'm just going to read his quote, and then I'm going to let Surit take over. So Mourinho responds to Solskjaer's jibe or joke, however you view it. After a match where VAR just fucked this Sunday from completely. Mourinho was like, he said no. When I was asked if he measured the goalposts, he's like, no, because I know the goalposts are fine. I think Ole yesterday was so happy and surprised with what happened to his team that he had a joke. But I understand for him, the dimensions of the goalposts are not important. For him, what is important is the dimensions of the 18-yard box. He would never accept to play with a 17-yard box. I think he would prefer a 22-yard box. For him, it would be better. Now, this was laying the smack down. But Surit, what's the problem with this quote?
Well, there are many problems with it. I think Jose has completely lost his sense of humor, if at all he ever had one. And let me just say this. I mean, did you actually see Mourinho deliver this? It was like he had spent the whole of Saturday night learning these lines up. And then he was before the camera trying to sort of deliver this, and he was fumbling all over the place. And then he was sort of going, oh yeah, this 18 yards and 22 yards. He was getting all confused. And it was like the only preparation that he had done before Newcastle, I mean, at least in the morning of the Sunday or whatever, was sit over his breakfast and try and kind of think over how he should get one over Solskjaer in the post-match. It was embarrassing, frankly. And I mean, he's completely lost his marbles. And this is not the old Jose. I love the old Jose. I liked some of those barbs from him. I mean, he was always great value. But this was neither funny nor was it. I mean, I think he just sort of,
how is this not funny, right? If you thought the Solskjaer jibe was funny, which I'm giving you credit for, how can this not be funny, bro?
What is so fun? I mean,
this is equally funny, bro. He's saying you have a reputation for winning penalties unfair, and he's saying you will be more bothered about the bloody penalty box. Isn't that a damn good takedown?
I mean, if we are winning penalties already going, I mean, actually, a joke should have some internal.
You just won Saturday night. You just won in the most epic 100-minute penalty.
Exactly. So joke should at least have an internal consistency to it. What does he mean they'd prefer it if it were 22 yards? That would mean that we aren't winning penalties and therefore we want it to be 22 yards.
This is what happens when advocate gets an analysis joke. I'm going to ask Anirban Das Gupta to please come in. Is this a good joke?
This is a great joke, and I am all for managers acting like they are podcasters. Okay, this is perfect. Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Perfect, dude. It was a phenomenal game where Newcastle in 3 games have had 3 shots on target and scored 3 goals.
Yeah.
It's incredible, dude. It's unbelievable. These are the kind of things that fucks with fantasy Premier League managers. Forget Steve Bruce. The rest of us would be like, what do you do with this? And then, of course, there's Burnley and Southampton, a 1-0 there. But, of course, there's something that must be spoken about Burnley. I don't think it's mentioned often enough. Right now, they're going through such a torrid time. They've lost all 3 so far? Is that right? Along with Sheffield United, they're the
2.
They didn't play the first week, I think.
Okay, fair enough. So the context, though, is that Sean Dyche's squad is really, really plagued with injuries, and he's been making open pleas to his owners on the kind of players they're looking for. And as last year, right, Steve Cook for 20 million from Bournemouth is what they were looking at, and I don't understand why would you pay 20 million for Steve Cook, who's almost 30. He's touching. Is gone, is past it. But so Ram, if you could fill in on what Burnley is looking for and what their squad's average age is like, based on what I remember, it's not really high. It's not really that young either. What's the situation there?
It's I mean, kind of slowly they're adding some assets to their squad in terms of, obviously they developed Dwight McNeil, and they brought in Charlie Taylor from Leeds United, as you'll know, and they have Josh Brownhill from Bristol City. So obviously they have this kind of policy going where they're buying, the better players from the Championship, and obviously Tarkowski is probably the best example of that. And obviously it can work very well. So I can only sort of expect that either Burnley's board really don't have enough money to spend on a very high quality replacement for Tarkowski, so they're going for someone like Steve Cook, or Sean Dyche also kind of values like the experience and intangibles that a leader like Steve Cook would bring, which is understandable. But I think the overarching point over here is that how long is Sean Dyche going to keep working miracles at Burnley season after season when they're on a shoestring budget and spending like 8 to 10 million on some of the best Championship players, maybe 1 or 2 per season, but that's it. Like there's very little investment going into that squad, and it's either Sean Dyche leaves soon, or I mean, I think that's the only eventual outcome, because he's obviously a good manager, but he needs to be backed at some point, or Burnley are just going to, I don't know, there's going to be variance in their performances, and they might finish mid-table one season, and then inevitably they might be facing the drop. So
I think when Sean Dyche leaves, they will face this big problem, because the amount they've spent is really not making sense. Because even a Bournemouth with similar attendances, similar revenue, probably Burnley have a bigger stadium, have spent a lot more in the time that they were in the Premier League, whereas Burnley have kind of stuck to their gun. That's strange. But Southampton, though, talk about getting a clean sheet after getting thumped for 5 goals. That's without a change in system, without a change in philosophy. It's still the 4-4-2. It's still Ings and Adams, leading the line there. I'm very happy for of course, Southampton. They're a very nice team to support, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah, definitely are. One of those neutrals that you just can't dislike, because they do things right, and the club is generally well run. And obviously they buy very good players from the Championship and, these lower profile leagues like Belgium and all, and they make it work. So yeah, it's just obviously we talked about how Hasenhüttl is a bit of a stickler for his principles, and he probably isn't going to change his approach that much from game to game. But yeah, that it's just the way the cookie crumbles, right? So either you can have like a result where they get torn apart by the opponent doing the same thing over and over, like Tottenham, or they could just like genuinely just play well and get a decent result. Although in this case,
it helped them when they played Burnley.
Yeah, but it was kind of like, I mean, it was a bit Southampton-y in the sense that they didn't really dominate possession and they didn't really outshoot their opponents. But I think on the balance, they were probably the better team and got the deserved win.
Right. Then let's move to Everton 2, Crystal Palace 1. Okay, now when do we start hyping them up? I really want to ask this question because Ancelotti is there. He's just pretty much come and said, hey, give me the best in the business. Let's not build for the future and all. I anyway stay for only 2 years. So give me my Allens and the Doucourés and the James and I'll work with it. I was looking at that match and I was just baffled by the depth in the squad suddenly they seem to have. They're bringing Sigurdsson from the bench, bringing Tom Davies from the bench. Iwobi, Walcott's not even getting a look in right now. That's a damn good squad, and if they can add more, I'm not even sure if they're looking for more. But what was the interesting points for you in that match, Surit?
Yeah, I mean, I think Everton have sort of addressed some core concerns over the course of the summer in terms of fixing their midfield. And they're a much better watch now. I mean, James is a beautiful player to watch, as we discussed last weekend, and Calvert-Lewin has obviously come on leaps and bounds. But the concern in terms of hyping them up right now is whether they faced enough trouble at the back. I mean, Pickford, again, sort of making mistakes for goals. I don't know if he's the best of goalkeepers around. And the centre-back pairing, they've done okay so far, Michael Keane and Mina. But those are I think, potentially problematic areas for Everton. And maybe when they come up against some of these teams that press high, you could see Keane and Mina struggling a little bit. But Ancelotti, obviously a class manager, you could see that he's already put sort of some of these principles in play in terms of coaching the team. This is actually two very well coached teams, Everton and Crystal Palace, in terms of I mean, Palace, you might be somebody who doesn't quite enjoy watching Hodgson's teams play, but there's always a certain structure to the way they play in terms of how they defend, especially 2 banks of 4. It's always neat and compact, and he drills that into the team. Right, last season they don't score enough, Palace, so they depend quite a bit on their defense and on their ability to keep clean sheets to stay up. So this was a good match in that sense to watch, because it was two well-coached sides. And I think Everton, I mean, going forward this season, because this season, I mean, it's a bit of a mad season, Red, already. There's going to be plenty of, I think it's going to be a topsy-turvy season. So I don't know if the likes of Everton, I mean, Liverpool are obviously clear favourites for the league, but maybe the likes of Everton and Arsenal, in terms of a top 4 finish, maybe even pushing up to the top 2 or 3, who knows if things go for them.
I think I had a realization while watching them when they brought on Sigurdsson and how you could see him alter the game. He doesn't even have to play the CAM role. He played in a more withdrawn role. The versatility that some of the options of the bench, Iwobi was first brought on to the left and then moved to the middle because he was losing the ball off. And you could just see Ancelotti was just moving pieces around. This, I think, is a big thing moving in the long run to when the dip does happen. Every squad goes through the dip, and he has such good options to play around it. And a great manager, man. It can't go. It's one of the greatest managers out there. I mean, he's 61 now, but still, at worst, they would replace your Wolves and the Sheffield Uniteds in your top 6 and 8 is based on how Sheffield for sure, man. They're done, but we'll get to that later. But Wolves and the rest. So, yeah, good for them. And of course, for Crystal Palace, if just because we brought him up last week, Mr. Eze made his debut. And I was observing keenly, and he was okay. He was okay. In fact, once he moved, Zaha went back, and they sent Benteke up front, and you could see suddenly Zaha sprung to life because he got the ball more in positions where he liked it in left wing rather than up front where he was crowded out. But Eze was okay. There's more to come, and I wouldn't say we haven't seen anything close to what his capacity is, but this confidence is intact for Premier League. In the sense, he's wanting the ball, and he's the kind of guy who should always have that attitude because that's his biggest trait. So that's that. But moving on to West Brom 3, Chelsea 3. What a match. What a match. I again, just because of my vested interest here, watching Frank Lampard not have a clue about what to do on a pitch, at least from a point of view of us average fans who don't get into the dressing room, felt so nice. I looked at the lineup and I was like, wait, why is Tammy Abraham starting and Werner behind him and Havertz? And I was like, okay, I must ask.
That's the point of that.
Yeah, I know. I must ask Ram. I'm sure there's a point. But the point was just 1 point. There's not 3 points to that. I wish there was 3.
Walked into that.
So that immediately, and then Thiago Silva, who's again looks like a classic English player move, which is Big Sam used to do this. Big English managers would do this. Sign a guy, Neil Warnock especially. Sign a guy, immediately throw him because there's his impact. Classic thing. Next day itself. And sometimes it will work. That fellow looked like he's still not gotten over the jet lag, dude. That was horrible. So, Ram, please, I believe that was a tactical, mistake or showing his amateurness and all from Lampard. But Lampard blames it on individual mistakes. Where does the truth lie as a Chelsea fan? Go for it.
It's the slightly boring answer is, as always, the truth lies somewhere in between. But I think you can't really account for the fact that someone like Thiago Silva made an error of that, of that ilk, right? You don't expect, and he gave him captaincy also in his first match. Thiago Silva can.
He must have listened to his uncle Harry Redknapp and been like, okay, done, uncle. I will do this, uncle. For sure, uncle. That used to work in the 90s, bro. Not anymore. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it probably speaks volumes about the lack of leadership in the squad. But the other thing is, you don't expect someone to come in like that and make an error that directly leads to a goal. So that I felt as if that was like a huge swing, or like that was a pretty important turning point. Because fine, I mean, Marcos Alonso kind of gave away a very cheap turnover, and Callum Robinson scored with a pretty good finish from a fairly difficult angle. But then after that, I thought Chelsea were actually very good in the response to that goal, because there were 2 very good chances, also statistically good chances, for Werner and Tammy Abraham. And I mean, you wouldn't expect them to miss them in succession. So that was slightly, a bit of bad luck in our favor at that time. And then Thiago Silva goes and commits this error, and it's just the sort of event that can swing the momentum of the game in terms of mentality of the players. And then Alonso leaves Kyle Bartley completely open on a set piece, which again, no matter how much you coach set pieces on the training ground, you can't. How do you account for something like that happening?
I wish I could give you a very simple answer, but then they'll make the segment so elaborate. But you cannot. You're doing effectively what Lampard is doing. You're just putting it down to individual mistakes. A well-drilled team would have leadership, and leadership would automatically entail people taking bigger responsibilities there, as opposed to not just letting Marcos Alonso do his own thing. Somebody would be barking up his ass to say, "Hey, pick your guy."
Okay, fair enough. I can take that point. So it is a mix of individual errors and a lack of good defensive organization. That definitely. But I thought that if at least one of Abraham or Werner would have taken one of the pretty good chances that came their way in the first 20 minutes, then it could have ended up being like a tennis score. Given that Chelsea had a lot of attacking momentum, and in the second half, it was pretty much Lampard throwing the kitchen sink. In terms of, at one point, he took off Thiago Silva, brought on Olivier Giroud, and at that point, it was like, I don't know, 3-6-1 or something. Azpilicueta was playing centre back, Kante was playing centre back, but yeah, I feel as if I'm not going to ignore the issues here. There are obvious issues, like one is defensive organization. Two is that there is very little creativity coming from the midfield of N'Golo Kante and Kovacic. Kovacic is obviously a very good dribbler.
Which brings me, I have to bring in, because you brought in the midfield creativity. Yeah. Jorginho was absent, and that was a notable miss.
Okay.
Now, and that's something that, in fact, he's linked to Arsenal, and Arsenal fans are really confused.
Good.
And they're like, should I take this in a positive way, or should I be insulted? Anirban, what do you think? Do you think Chelsea would miss Jorginho? What do you make of Jorginho's role in that team?
I think Chelsea right now have a good squad. They're not getting the results, but I think they'll be fine. Also, after this match, you should file a copyright strike against Chelsea because they took your title, The Tale of Two Halves.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just go to Chelsea's YouTube page and just report them, okay?
Man, Jorginho, was he missed in this match, Ram, for you? Do you?
No.
What do you think?
No.
So you're not one of those Jorginho fanboys then?
No, never. I think he is useful in a certain type of setup.
Okay.
Which is not Chelsea's system at the moment.
And what do Chelsea need to do for a clean sheet then? You guys haven't even gotten one game. What is the thing? Isn't that down to coaching then?
It is, but
is Lampard does he have the capacity to create a team that can first cut the goals?
Yeah, he can. But see, I'm going to get a little stat nerdy over here. But last season, Chelsea's expected goals against was not actually very high. It was in top 3-4 in the league. They had an insane swing of goals conceded versus expected goals conceded because one, Kepa Arrizabalaga was in goal. And two, a lot of the chances that they conceded were good because they left themselves open. Some of which was due to system that Lampard has been implementing, which obviously the fullbacks go very, very high, and that leaves a lot of space in behind. But you need a competent sitting midfielder. And unfortunately, that is not N'Golo Kante, who gets very exuberant in trying to press and win the ball back. And it is not Jorginho either, because he has certain obvious limitations to his game, and he's not, that type of defensive midfielder. So I think if we had a competent goalkeeper in goal and someone who can actually play like a sitting six, they would have conceded less goals last season. This season, I think the sample size is still very small to make judgments like Chelsea are going to leave themselves wide open. So we'll see.
We'll see. I'm more than happy to bring up Frank Lampard, considering my history with them. But go on, Anirban.
Yeah, so Frank Lampard, when he points out that, this was this player's mistake, this was this player's mistake at the press conference, then what happens when he goes to the dressing room? It must be like a little very awkward for the team, right? Like if the manager is, it's obviously you're going to lose matches because of individual mistakes, but Lampard seems to be Just interested in that.
So,
I mean,
I can add to the theory, Ram.
Okay,
I
go
think you need to take a breather for a while now.
Yeah.
Considering so many attacks against Chelsea, it must feel very personal, I'm sure.
Yes.
But Anirban, I think I've been reading up a lot on the criticism that Lampard receives. A lot comes down to his background, and he comes from a very well-to-do family and all of that sort. So there is already a classist perception that works against him, because he is one of those guys who has some 300 Ralph Lauren shirts that he changes every week. He's on that level. So my point there, to extend that argument to your question, he also has the club legend. He's the kind of guy who will flaunt this legend status. You know, you can see him actually be able to make the most of it, in the sense you're not really going to come and pick on him that easily unless the owner himself puts him in a difficult position. He has a lot of power. I mean, to see him what he did to Klopp the other, I think, which match was it, where he ended up asking Klopp.
Come on.
That was to me classic Lampard, thinking he's reached it already. Be like, hey, please shut up, Klopp. You saw that, right?
This is slander.
Yeah, it is slander, bro. That's what we do here. It's a podcast. But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Where he called out Klopp unnecessarily and all. That just shows you he has a lot of confidence. Some of it is earned, but a lot of it is actually inherited.
But he should be under pressure. He spent so much money, and this is the start of the season. But he seems to be, it was Kepa today. It was it can't be like that, no man.
That's true.
When will it be Frank?
What a way to close this segment. When will it be Frank? That's a fantastic way. Thanks, Anil. But I'll move to the next one here, because Lampard is going to be a continuous theme. West Ham 4, Wolves 0, and I'm genuinely surprised that nobody mentioned this as the surprising result when I asked you, because there's no way we saw this coming, dude.
Yeah. Sorry.
So, I mean, I did
All of you wasted your answers.
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
No, I probably didn't see a 4-0 loss, but as a result, I mean, I wasn't that surprised with Wolves losing, because all these teams across Europe who've been, who went deep into these European competitions have struggled a little in these opening couple of weeks. Yes, Wolves did win last week. They scored 2 early goals against Sheffield United. But even if you watched that match, Sheffield did sort of come back into it later. I mean, from what I read. So so I think I'm not especially surprised there in that sense, because you've seen you've seen even in Spain, Real Madrid struggle a little bit. You've seen Bayern Munich lose this weekend in the Bundesliga. Man United have struggled. Man City have struggled. So almost all of these teams that have gone kind of deepish into Europe.
And it doesn't help that they've had a lot of ins and outs. Semedo started. Podence was injured. Again, a lot of fantasy Premier League players, after him scoring against City, jumped in on Podence, and boom, he's out. And 4 goals though, man. It is very nice. Let me put it this way. I'm sure as a fellow Championship fan round again, see Bowen score the way he did. Both the goals were so Bowen, in the sense that guy is a proper poacher.
Correct.
He's just sniffing for it. The 2 goals was just him. It was so nice to see him get into the mix, because when West Ham do go down, I hope somebody pick him up. He works hard. He's versatile, and he's damn talented, right? As a good player, somewhere. And Moyes had COVID. In case any of you are feeling sympathetic, Surit, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, he apparently was managing this match over video conference, right? I mean, so.
Yeah.
I think they'll be happy to have him.
He did it on Zoom?
Yes, he did.
So,
and they won 4-0. Wow.
So I think, he probably had Football Manager open the other. Trying to
quickly play out scenarios.
Play out scenarios and see how it fits in. So, maybe they should go with Moisey up in the box, managing over video conference henceforth. Works for them.
So I'll just finish off with a quote from David Sullivan, the West Ham owner. He said, "We've got limited funds, and we've also got the fact that we'll probably get no gate money for the rest of the season, and we have to keep the club afloat and pay wages. So therefore, I cannot say for sure that we're going to sign anybody, but as each day passes, I get more depressed." This is an owner. Imagine if this is the quote coming from the ownership. As a fan, you're reading this, "Oh, owner, you're depressed." Oh, okay. I will support you. Like, as it is, the fan is feeling like shit in lockdown and corona and all that. And a rich owner like David Silva is like, this is getting very bad. Man, sometimes perspective is a beautiful thing. Anyways, we'll go to the last match, guys, which is the one that I've been waiting to talk to you all about. This is not last match actually. Wait. Sheffield United 0, Leeds United 1. Okay, so first things first. I wanted to quickly give you some context. Chris Wilder, the manager of Sheffield United, has a lot of history with Leeds with respect to, say, speaking out of his way to call us out, especially after winning promotion. He went out of his way and called Bamford in particular, or called him a Muppet. And I would like to put that on record. So the Muppet that scored the beautiful header in the 88th minute of this match. And I swear, I have never ever beat my chest like this, like one proper monkey I did on insane celebration. It was so satisfying to see Bamford do this Wilder. I love Wilder. I have all the respect for him, all the time in the world for him. But when you do talk trash, you're going to get it back in football within a season. This was beautiful to see. Tactically, this match was super. Bielsa did something that I could notice immediately, which was not there the first two games. He matched them formation to formation. We did not play four at the back in this. Stuart Dallas, people are mistaking this often, especially in Match of the Day. That is a shocking thing to see. In Match of the Day, they highlighted Stuart Dallas and they said for a left back to be getting into advanced midfield position. But he was not a left back, bro. We matched their system with Harrison playing left wing back, if you want to call it that, and Costa matching the other guy there, George Boyler. So Bielsa and Wilder have gone together a lot of times in the past, and it's been great tactical battles and tight 1-0 games. It's not a surprise this one turned out to be a 1-0 as well. So I thought the win was extremely well deserved. Particularly, if I want to point out something in Leeds that I noticed, was I was happy Robin Koch didn't concede a penalty, man. Enough. Thank you. Please come play normally. Get us a clean sheet. I thought he was superb. Dallas was fantastic. That the ability for a player to play across right back, right wing, central midfield, central defensive midfield. That is something else. To think that he started out in some Crusaders in Northern Ireland and then to Brentford, again the club that picks him up. And even when he was at Leeds, I didn't rate him at all. It's just Bielsa who showed me the player in him. So those are all things that gives you so much perspective of how wrong you can be about players, man. Until a manager comes and shows you in their true light. I've been eating so much humble pie about so many guys. But I hear a lot of you guys here have a lot to say about this particular match. So I'll let you take this one.
I mean, I was expecting you. Okay, no.
No, go Ram.
Yeah. I said to you at the start, if you wax too much lyrical about Leeds, then I might have to put you down a peg. But you've been fairly measured in your assessment of the game, which is good. It was such a fascinating tactical battle. I was just actually there's a quote about Sergio Busquets where they say you follow Busquets and you'll follow the game. In this case, I was following Stuart Dallas and I followed the game because
exactly
it was. I love it. It's a brilliant role. His pseudo central midfield / and he kept interchanging as well, which is obviously a feature of the system. But yeah, I felt in the first half, both teams were very evenly matched. Actually, they both carved out opportunities that were good, and Sheffield United are probably unlucky to not have scored.
That's one of the greatest saves that probably.
I was just coming to that.
What a save!
I thought. I mean, the save of the season until now for sure was Meslier. Remarkable. I thought that was in. I mean,
same here.
The kind of force with which the strike Lundstrom was it?
Lundstrom. Yeah.
He was moving the other way, then he jumped the other way. It was something else.
It was reminiscent of De Gea.
Everything is reminiscent of De Gea. Everything. I am also reminiscent of De Gea to you. Okay. I was hoping he wouldn't do that.
When his shot stopping was, sort of at that caliber.
But here's something, a stat about Sheffield United that should worry because it's been around for a long time. I don't think it can last any longer. Mm-hmm. The strikers had 0 shots on target. I know the system doesn't particularly enable a striker in front of goalies, more facilitating the advanced runners. Ram, I know you'll get to that. Having said that, you still need strikers who can get off a shot, and it's not necessarily the second. That is second nature.
He's trying to sign one, right? I mean, been linked with Graham Brewster and Liverpool and somebody else.
He's been very open about all of that. Yes, and I was very happy to see Rodrigo finally come and have a positive impact. And in fact, Bielsa never singles out players after a match. He tries his best not to. But he in particular pointed out Rodrigo just because he subbed him at halftime in the previous game. Even in this match, he brought him at halftime and subbed him before 90. So that goes to tell you also he's not anywhere near physically fit. But it also, Bielsa did point out the fact that he showed a lot of positive qualities with respect to being able to quickly get the attacking intent going. He's the reason why that goal happened. He asked for the ball in a tight area and switched it to the left flank quickly for the cross to happen. And if you follow Leeds United TV, you'll know apparently Bamford had been asking Harrison to cross him before this game, just because of the centre backs that who are not particularly aerially the best, the ones that they have. So it's an inside thing that he called, and he said, I called it, I asked for it, and he did have a chance in the first half. And I'm supremely happy, man. And we have not even signed our best players yet. Diego Llorente, in case you guys haven't been following, has signed for Leeds United, Spanish third choice or fourth choice centre back.
Do you think he's one of your best players?
I'm sorry?
Do you think he's going to be one of your best players, though?
I don't know whether he's going to be my best player because I haven't seen him play enough to make a comment, but I'm just happy that he's signing depth as opposed to the championship policy for Bielsa was having 17 players and rotating them across. We can't afford that in the Premier League. We really need a lot deeper squad. Diego Llorente, Dan James is apparently at 12 million. I don't know if Manchester United have accepted that bid so far or not. I mean, I'm sure Nazim last episode are more than happy to let him go. Although people in the comment section had one particular person said, "Why do we have to let him go and watch Bielsa make him into a superstar? Why can't we do that?
Turn him into Mbappe."
I'm like, yes. So we need a winger, and we got a centre back, and the other guy. I haven't heard Ram, the Bayern Munich central attacking midfielder.
Oh, Cuisance. Yeah.
Well, is he any good?
Oh yeah, he's very, very good. He's actually, I mean, many people who regularly follow the Bundesliga as well would champion him as one of the hottest prospects in that league at the moment. And I'm personally very surprised that he's being let go for about 22 million or whatever it was. But I feel as if given Forshaw is out, adding someone like Cuisance to the squad would enable you to play with like 2 number 8-ish players in there.
Yeah.
Given if, in the event that maybe Pablo is out, you have more of an attacking 8 in Cuisance in his place.
Right.
So, yeah, they're very, very exciting. And he's left-footed. So, nice. More of the natural, nice right-left balance to the squad. So you should be very, very excited. If
I am, man, because I'm even if he doesn't, I'm just excited to see how Bielsa is adapting to the Premier League. In 3 matches, I've seen so many variations tactically.
Yeah.
And next game they play is City, and that's the next match we're going to talk about because Manchester City 2, Leicester City 5. Oh goodness, what was happening last night? I don't know. And I would like to open this with Anirban because he had the best way to summarize this. Go for it.
I just told you before the show, Pep is the worst manager ever. But listen, man, like somebody has to like talk about Pep's performance. Like I think next time he concedes a goal in training, he's gonna buy a centre back. Like this, that. His strategy is exactly my strategy for fantasy league. Okay, like I see somebody do well, I just get him in the next day. How is this? Like they were almost they had a European ban, they got out of it, and their ban was supposed to be because they spent more money than they should, and now look at them. Like they spent 100 million on defenders this season, and still 5. Like it's great. This country, I guess. When the match started, City were like quite all over Leicester, but then I did not watch the match for the longest time, and when I like tuned in, it was 5-2, and I was like, "This is a strategy I'm going to employ every match."
So there was a comment about this match, which is that there is a debate on were Leicester negative because Eric Garcia or Rodri who came out and said they parked the bus. But I was looking out for it. That didn't look like a parking the bus because some of the people in that bus were right next to the defenders of City who were on the halfway line.
What's wrong with this parking?
Exactly.
I mean, I find this kind of attitude pretty annoying, actually.
Snobbery.
I mean, yeah, frankly. I mean, there are different ways to win a football match, and you've got to do the best you can given the players that you have. I mean, Leicester City haven't spent the amount of money that Manchester City have, right? I mean, how do you expect them to just go out there, like set them up the same way, play, nice and open, and let City have all the kind of free space that they want to and attack the areas that they would like to want and keep giving Rodri the ball, don't press him, let him have as much of it as he wants. I mean, it's just complete nonsense, frankly.
Yeah,
I mean, there are different ways of winning a match. And in fact, Brendan Rodgers did say that he was not used to employing the kind of tactic that he had against Man City. In terms of letting Man City have the ball and trying to play a little bit more on the break and kind of try and hit them on the transitions. Because I think Rodgers, we've seen the way he's played previously with Liverpool, especially. I mean, he does have certain principles, and he kind of used to stick to them even in matches against what were at the time slightly better opposition. But he's kind of come around now to, I think, recognizing that against certain teams, especially against the likes of Man City, that he needs to let them have the ball in certain areas, especially the pitch, where there's no point in kind of pressing them.
Yeah, but this is, I mean, Leicester should take a big step up with this result, but Manchester City is exact opposite, right? Like, what's going to happen to their season after this? I mean, if Liverpool are looking at this and they've just signed Thiago and Anirban, are you not already feeling that the title is yours? It just
In the match between City and Leicester City and Manchester City, Liverpool actually won. See, City has had a tough start, right? They got Wolves, then this match, then I think they have Leeds away, and Arsenal, but they have spent 400 million on defenders. I saw a tweet which just summed up the whole thing so nicely. Just listed out all the defenders and the price tags. It totaled to 400 million. And then just a 3-word sign off: disgustingly mind blowing. I think that like sums it up. What is this, man?
Disgustingly mind blowing was definitely how I would summarize that game. With 5-3 penalties, and after a point, the third penalty. You should have seen the City players' reaction. I don't know if they were complaining about the referee being so lenient or some idiotic Benjamin Mendy giving. It's like, what are you reacting
so casual.
to? Yeah, and it was genuine. All 3 were bang on penalties. You can't argue any of it. So no sympathies for them. Okay, so this is the segment where we make predictions about next week's fixtures, and if you can channel your inner octopus and get 4 out of 4 predictions right, then you will be the winner of Paul the Octopus Memorial Bounty. Before we take a look at next week's fixtures, let's take a look at the predictions from last week. Last week's we made some call predictions. This is where we put them all to shame. Okay, all of us, first question that came last week was, which team will finish at the bottom of the table by today? All of us predicted Fulham and West Brom. But the correct answer, in fact, is Sheffield United. Okay? And then which team will have the most shots on target? While the rest of us predicted Leeds, Chelsea, and Manchester City, Surat got this right. With Tottenham, who chalked up 12 shots on target, and yet Surat had the gall to have a go at Mourinho. That's the shamelessness that you expect from a Manchester United fan. Okay. And then we wanted to predict which team will jump up the most places in the standings. The 4 pundits went for Southampton, Sheffield, and Burnley, but the correct answer, in fact, is, any guesses? West Ham United, who went from 17th, ending up at 10th. The goal difference is great difference now. Right? And finally, the final question, which is there in every Octopus Bounty round, the highest scoring game. Ram and Surat got the fixture right, which is Manchester City and Leicester City, but no one got the correct score line.
Impossible. That's impossible.
It of course ended 5-2 to Leicester. So no one got 4 out of 4, guys. The bounty is now increased to 1,500 rupees. Every time the bounty increases, I realize I'm paying out of my pocket. I'm so glad you guys are so shit at this. Okay, let's look at the fixtures for next weekend now. Chelsea, Crystal Palace, Everton, Brighton, Leeds, Man City, Newcastle, Burnley, Leicester, West Ham, Southampton, West Brom, Arsenal, Sheffield United, Wolves, Fulham, Man United, Spurs, Aston Villa, Liverpool. Right? So I'm going to pick categories from this weirdly shaped fish bowl, and we are going to make predictions, and let's see if you guys have what it takes to win the Octopus Memorial Bounty. First one I'm taking out of this, guys, is which team will have the most shots on target?
Manchester City.
I'd go with Liverpool.
I think it'll be Chelsea because Crystal Palace are going to sit back a lot. So yeah, Chelsea are going to attack a lot. So yeah.
Okay. I'll take that, and then the next.
You have to answer, right, Essay?
Correct. Thanks for the reminder. Otherwise, I'll remember it in the second time. I think I'll go with Liverpool. Which team will jump up the maximum number of places on the table? I know we are not showing you the table,
Man City.
I think Man United.
I think it's going to be Sheffield United.
Okay, you know what I figured as my formula? Just go with Surit's answers because he's so prepared. He's so smart. So Man City is my answer, guys. Man City is my answer.
Hey, I'll also do this now.
Next question, guys. Which fixture will have the earliest substitution?
Leeds, Man City.
Leeds, Man City.
Leeds, Man City. Bielsa loves a half-time sub. I don't see how anyone could answer differently.
Okay, fine. Leeds, Man City. Damn it. That is my answer now. One time I had my own original answer. But okay, cool. Okay, and then the final prediction, guys, which is the highest scoring game. The game and the result.
I'm going for the same match, Leeds, Man City. I'll go Man City 4, Leeds United 1.
Ooh. Okay, I'd go with Liverpool, Aston Villa. Liverpool 4, Aston Villa 1.
I'm going Southampton versus West Brom. I think it'll end 5-2 to Southampton.
That will be 3 weeks running 5-2 scoreline.
Okay, I'm going to do something for my friends who are all Arsenal fans. I'm going 4-0 to Arsenal. So let's get on to our next segment now, which is fantastic players and where to find them. Okay, so the FPL segment, the one that we've all been waiting for. First and foremost, let me tell you where these fantastic panelists are before you find the fantastic players. Mr. Ram, man, so much hype I give you every week. 357 out of 308 from 388. It's actually a great increase. Your XG is very high on this, I must say. So, and Mr. Anirban, you are in 378, bro. You are the one who does this full time, bro.
No, I don't. I didn't even make changes, man. I'm very, very disappointed.
Then you should do what Neville, our fellow comedian, did. His team name is forgot to make changes.
That's the
best team name ever. and Azim's position is not available. We'll get that sorted. And I am in right now 155. And now let's move on to the leaderboard. Completely ignoring Sudhir. Okay, Surit, take your momentum.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 28th, and I also want to point out that there's still 4 players of mine who are left to play, who have to play tonight, including my captain.
Ooh.
Wow! Oh goodness! Wow! Okay,
I should hopefully make some.
I think when SA asks the team that will like go up the most in a table, you should say yourself.
That's true. So our leader right now is one Mr. Aditya Abhishek with 222 points, and the best team name in the top 10 goes to what the fuck is signed Thiago FC. You guys have already signed him. Now, why are you Liverpool fans still like this, dude? You behave like champions and not whiners.
No, let us.
Okay, now let's quickly get to that part there. You all have to, give me your dirt on your tactics for the next week's captain's pick. Surit, go for it.
Yeah, I think I'll stick with Aubameyang. I've gone for 3 weeks in a row with him because Arsenal play at home to Sheffield United. I'll probably go with Aubameyang.
Unless Salah gets injured in the match against Arsenal, it'll be Salah next week as well.
I've spent 2 game weeks captaining Timo Werner, so I've kind of lost faith at this point. So I'm just going to captain Mohamed Salah because Liverpool are playing Aston Villa. So there's a high chance that he might score or assist.
Fantastic. And that's the end of the episode, guys. So this is Tale of Two Halves. Thank you so much. We'll be back next week with results from next weekend's games and more opinions and more banter, more panelists. And see you all then. But of course, my captain's pick, Danny.